Thank you so much for joining our panel session this evening. We're honored that you've chosen to invest your time with us. My name is Cindy Lopez, and I'm the Director of Community Connections here at CHC, and I'll be the moderator for the panel this evening as well. So as you note on the slide, you'll be muted for the duration of the webinar. Please use the chat feature for your comments. And we have people working behind the scenes that can answer any questions for you. And also use the Q&A feature. So the Q&A feature on Zoom is where we will be pulling your questions from for our Q&A session at the end of our time together this evening. So let me share a little bit about CHC with you. So we've been providing top-rated mental health and learning services here in our local community for about 70 years. And here today, with COVID-19 and all of its effects, the need for mental health services is even more important than ever. So as a result, we offer teletherapy services now so you can access the support you need safely. And we also offer free 30-minute consultations. So if you have a question and you're not sure about what next steps might be, that could be a good option for you. And sorry. All the information is on this slide, so you can reach out to us about any of those things. And we are recording this, and so we will have the recording available in our resource library, our online resource library at chconline.org sometime next week. So we offer services across these 4 areas of expertise, and specifically for services for kids, teens, and young adults. And again, right now it's all via teletherapy. And we also offer lots of free community education programs like this that you're experiencing tonight, and also virtual parent support groups, free educational content through our curated online resource library. And we just launched our very first podcast series called Voices of Compassion. So you can access all of that, again, through our website, chconline.org. So here we are this evening. We're looking at mental health and learning through the lens of, what we're living through right now, uncertain times, COVID, and everything else that's going on around us. So our panel this evening is filled with experts who can provide insights and thoughts and evidence-based strategies to help you, to support you and your families during this time. Before I introduce the panelists, I just want to say a few housekeeping items to remember. So again, please use the chat feature if you have comments or anything that you would like to share. And if you have any troubleshooting issues, our folks that are working behind the scenes can help you with that, hopefully. And the first part of our session will focus on a panel discussion with some pre-planned questions. We'll give you some context around mental health and learning, and then some pre-planned questions. And then the second part of our session tonight will focus on you and your questions. So again, we'll gather the questions that you post in the Q&A, and we'll answer those, and we'll pose those questions to our panelists in the last part of our session. Our plan is to leave about 30 minutes for that Q&A. And so finally, we are going to follow up this session with an email to you that contains an online survey. And the survey responses provide valuable information for us about how to improve our community education offerings. And it also provides data to our donors who support these community education offerings. And we're fortunate to be able to offer this free of charge because of generous donors. And of course, we would welcome any donation you might want to give as well. So I'm happy to introduce our panelists today. Dr. Glen Elliott has a wealth of experience with kids and families and is an internationally known expert regarding ADHD interventions. Dr. Vivien Keil is an experienced neuropsychologist who specializes in the evaluation of children and young adults. And Chris Harris has deep experience in education, working with working with students with learning, social, emotional, and behavioral challenges. So with that, I will ask Dr. Elliott to take it from here.
This slide is almost certainly out of date. I don't think it's going to surprise anyone, except that maybe you will have a real sense of shared experience. The COVID experience, which is, now has gone on for many, many months, has significantly had an adverse effect on mental health for all ages. It's certainly including adolescents and children, but also parents and teachers and everybody else who lives in the United States. The recent uncertainty, for example, that we've been experiencing in Santa Clara County just adds to that. We're not sure what's going to happen next. We don't know whether things are going to get better or worse. The numbers you can easily read, and I'm not going to go over them in detail. The underlying point is that because of shelter in place, because of virtual learning, because families are together and much more hours, many more hours of the day than usual, there are a lot of tensions that build, and there's something called pandemic fatigue, which is the idea that this has just been going on so long we can't really tolerate it much anymore, but we have to. These numbers sort of really underscore particularly anxiety and depression as major likely problems that might lead you to want to seek help with a mental health professional.
Thank you, Glenn. And then related, I actually just saw a statistic last week coming from the Child Mind Institute that 70% of our children and adolescents are endorsing significant feelings of anxiety, depression, and loneliness. So it's actually, I agree that I think when that slide was made, the numbers were actually seemingly lower than what we're experiencing right now. So it is pretty striking to watch those statistics increase. And then in addition to all of those statistics, we have what is truly, and as they say, I'm sure you've heard this word way too many times this year, unprecedented, right? 2020 is the year of not only COVID, it's the year of social and racial unrest and political hostility and a lot of natural disasters, including wildfires and evacuations, just to name a few of the defining features of our year. And so for better or for worse, what this has created is a common experience, but also a common experience of like all of our coping strategies being pushed to the absolute limits. So our goal today really is to talk about kind of what are the challenges and the variables at the individual, family, and the educational level that has pushed our coping to the limits. And hopefully really through our discussion and the Q&A, we want to figure out, how can we cope better with all of these challenges that have been coming our way.
So the individual is, of course, significantly affected. When you're talking again about teens and children, there are a variety of areas in which life is very different for them and for, of course, their parents as well. One of the issues many parents have worried for a long time about excessive screen use. Now, because of virtual education, screen use is up markedly, and parents often are unable to distinguish is this schoolwork that they're doing or other kinds of things. They're always on the device. There is such a thing as screen fatigue. Most of us have experienced it. There also is a mismatch with some individuals' learning needs. There are some children and adolescents who simply can't spend as much time on the screen as they're expected to doing homework and attending the class. And those individuals right now are not really getting an education, and Chris will be talking about that later. In addition to that, because we're sheltering in place most of the time, kids are really distanced from their friends. Perhaps they can connect with them over social media, but it's not the same. There are special milestones that are constantly being missed. Things like sports, graduations, really special events, birthdays that kids are used to celebrating as a social event, and they're not able to do that right now. We just went through Thanksgiving, and many people were not able to do what they traditionally do every year. And leisure activities are markedly limited unless you just really like walking around the block. The other real problem is that there are shifting expectations, and there's really no way to predict the future. I don't think anybody really anticipated this latest surge in COVID and the effects that that's been having. There's also, particularly with adolescents, even more than younger kids, a ongoing tension when you've got everybody crowded into the home most of the day, between the need to develop independence and the desire to be taken care of, and reality that in fact kids are going to be much less independent than they have been before the pandemic started. And all of that affects what we've already touched on. It increases anxiety and depression. There also is the specific fear about contracting COVID, which varies from really incredibly nonchalant with sort of no awareness of the potential seriousness of it, to really not taking any chances whatsoever. Who knows, COVID might be lingering somewhere. There's a reality that this can cause deaths and as well as serious illness. So people are losing loved ones, and often they're doing that in a way that they're not able to even be with them in their final hours and days. And as Vivien touched on earlier, on top of all of that, 2020 has graced us with an extraordinary array of racial unrest, natural disasters, especially here in California with the fires, the political upheavals that have been going on. And all of that combines to what we think of as complicated grief. It leads us to mourn things that we aren't able to do, milestones that we wanted to do, and also at the same time trying to support other family members and friends.
Glen's frozen video is a wonderful transition to this next slide because family factors. Today was one of those days, I have to say, in my household, because I was on Zoom the entire day, as was my kindergartner and my second grader, and we all had varying tech issues all day. So it really was just one of those days. And that level of constant, so basically parents we're in-home IT departments, right? We have to constantly try and make sure that our kids are getting what they need in whatever setting they're in right now, while also trying to, if we're fortunate enough to be employed right now, we need to somehow maintain whatever our professional responsibilities are. Which has been quite a feat for everyone, I would say. And we're trying to do all of these juggling acts while also being isolated from whatever our primary support activities or people were. So whether that was a best friend or an extended family member, or you were part of a sports team that allowed you to kind of blow off steam or things like that. We don't have those same outlets anymore, while juggling all of these things that have already been discussed. And we're spending too much time together, right? So we're kind of on top of each other all the time. And that is not typical or normal. And so the number of opportunities that we have, whether it be for sibling conflict or parent-child conflict or caregiver conflict. There are lots of opportunities for things to go awry. And then the backdrop for all of this, I think what truly throws the family unit off is that much of what we've discussed is completely outside of our control. So when my kids' school is in person, hybrid, or remote is completely 100% outside of my control. And essentially what I have to do is just pivot and do the best I can when those decisions are made. And so there's just a constant shifting that is happening that kind of paralyzes our ability as parents to be planners. The best analogy that I have come up with in my own life is it really feels like we've been thrown on a boat in choppy waters, and our challenge is constantly trying to find our footing, right? Trying to find our balance. But of course, the problem is even if you get that moment or a few days or a day of feeling balanced, the seas change very quickly, and then we're thrown off again, and we're having to find our equilibrium again. And I would even go so far as to say it's not only being thrown on a boat, we're kind of being thrown in open water where the destination, the end site is very unclear. So it's not that we can all say, okay, we're going back into the harbor, right? It's just going to be one more month. We don't have that level of certainty or reassurance. And so it's this chronic level of instability and this chronic inability to plan and feel pretty out of control at times that I think really has challenged the entire family unit, because we do know from a mental health standpoint, we know that a high sense of control is linked to positive mental health outcomes. It's a good thing to feel like you are in control of your surroundings. And what's happened as a result of all that is 2020 essentially is that it really has underscored more than anything all that is not in our control. And that's a very hard place to sit as a parent and as a family unit.
Good evening, everyone. So now you add the complexity of 30 hours of education that everyone's expecting to get, and the pressure of lost years or the perception of a lost year of education since last March. So let's start with screen use. And it's been very well articulated by Glen and Vivien that it is certainly a hardship, especially for kids who have specialized needs. The youngsters who are having behavioral disorders in classrooms are not getting the remediation and the interventions they need in order to be able to go back to that environment right now. These are the youngsters with attention deficits are struggling to stay on. And when I talk about education, let's go back and take the teachers who are both individuals and oftentimes members of families. So they've got the first two layers that we've already talked about, and now we're adding this added job of complexity, which very few teachers have had much training for. So they are reacting and responding as best they can. But I know, and I heard this from my own staffs at Children's Health Council, they're feeling inadequate in what they're doing. And so that adds another stress that they're not facilitating the kind of progress that they normally would be if they were live in class. Interestingly, though, that isn't everybody. And there are about 20% of our kids in both schools who are actually doing better at home, because a lot of the anxiety they manifest is because they're in a classroom and they get anxious about how they're doing in comparison to everyone else. So there is a group of kids who are actually discovering that distance learning is of value to them. And I think it's something that we're going to be thinking about in the long term, is that everybody doesn't prosper in a classroom setting. Certainly we need to limit the screen time and make sure they socialize, but we have discovered some benefits to distant learning for some of our kids who are particularly anxious. In terms of social isolation, I can tell you that the schools at CHC both started hybrid programs in October. The Esther B. Clark School used a half-day model, and Sand Hill used an alternate day hybrid model with stable cohorts. And at the end of the semester, we actually conducted a survey, and I can't even stress the importance. The kids were so happy to be back just live with their friends, despite wearing masks, despite having to talk to them from 6 feet away, despite having plastic shields between them. That the idea of having live contact really played out in these surveys. And I don't think we should take that lightly. As we look at a second semester for these youngsters, they need that kind of exposure. And we have, I think many schools in the area have recognized and been able to adhere to the Department of Public Health and safety protocols. And just doing that mitigates an awful lot of the anxiety and the social isolation that they are feeling when they're constantly at home. The biggest issue we're struggling with right now in education, and I know teachers are, I know parents are, I know the students are, is the uncertainty of the future, which Glen and Vivien had talked about, and where this pandemic is going and what it means for the holiday season and what it means for going back to school in January. You know, I know that educators and school districts and private schools are very concerned about having to write the letter that COVID has infected their particular campus. Everybody's doing everything they can, but the fact of the matter is, just as quickly as we had to close down in March, that prospect is looming for second semester. And there's going to be absolutely inevitably a disappointment amongst all the constituencies, parents, youngsters, and teachers if we have to go back and start all over on this process again. So we're trying to look optimistically at the future, but that uncertainty certainly looms in the back. And then we certainly have seen from the survey as well that our kids are feeling stressed. They have said that. We have spent a lot of time on the hybrid models, making sure that the kids' social emotional well-being is optimized and that they're feeling as good as we can. It's a part of the curriculum right now. It's part of the daily schedule. And while I know there's pressure to catch up, and whatever that means now, because 9 months is virtually hard for anyone to catch up, we know that youngsters are not going to be available for rigorous education until they are in an emotional and a social state that they feel comfortable enough and safe enough and predictable enough to engage in rigorous academics again. So there's many, many challenges here in the educational realm, and the uncertainty is certainly the one that looms as large as anyone. Next slide, please. So as you can see, and we just talked about in the previous slide, you can see in these concentric circles at the end that education certainly is, or the individual is impacted by their membership in the family, and then the added burden of actually being very, very involved in their child's education, usually pretty much so at levels they have never had to, or they've never been involved with. And in some cases that can cause some anxiety amongst the parents, because they actually haven't witnessed how hard the kids struggle in school and how hard it is for them to attend and how frustrating the technology can be at times. And all of these are adding more and more stress, not only to the family system, as we know, but to each individual in that family as well, including youngsters and the parents. So these emotions that you see, and we'll come back to this slide in just a few minutes, these emotions you see are prevalent, they're understandable, they're part of what we're all dealing with right now. And we'll talk a little bit about how to sort of manage those and what we ought to do in the different units in just a couple of minutes.
I think one other thing that strikes me about this diagram is, if you remember the first diagram where I first spoke earlier in this presentation, we had these 3 wonderfully clean bubbles that were largely separate and somewhat overlapping. I think what this picture right here really shows is that it's all kind of on top of each other now. And there really is no boundary between what was school life, work life, personal life. It's actually just all superimposed and kind of sitting on top of each other right now. And everything kind of runs into each other, which is stressful unto itself. The other thing about this diagram that's interesting and quite challenging is that all of the emotions and experiences that are around those circles are being experienced at every single level. So our kids are experiencing this. We are experiencing this as parents. Our educators are absolutely experiencing this. So it's a totally different ball game, because in our previous lives, parents and educators, at least we liked to think, right, that we had these things more under control and that we were more regulated ourselves, and we were the ones that were excellent role models and things like that. And that's really become a lot more challenging these days because of the extent to which we are all stressed and impacted by what's going on.
So that brings us back to the individual, where all of these things manifest themselves. And as Vivien said, it really does feel like the world is kind of imploding on top of each person, child, adult, and teacher. And these kinds of things are not all that uncommon, even under milder times. But the level of stress that our society is undergoing right now is essentially unprecedented, certainly anything short of war. And the shared experience of being isolated, if you will, is what creates so many of these kinds of potential difficulties and actual difficulties. And as was already touched on, the uncertainty of when it's going to end, or even sometimes if it's going to end. It's like my screen continuing to freeze just when I want it to be working. The challenge then for each of us is how do we help our children on the one hand, and in doing that, how do we make sure that we get what we need as parents and adults, and how do teachers maintain their own lives while they're continuing to provide an education. And there's no single answer to that, but certainly we do have things that we can try to address.
Well, thank you, Glenn and Chris and Vivien, for sharing, giving us some context about our discussion this evening, and sharing your thoughts and insights and expertise on this topic of mental health. As I mentioned before, we have some pre-planned questions we're going to start now. And these are questions that we've been hearing from parents for several months now. And then once we finish this set of pre-planned questions, we'll be able to go and use your questions, the questions that you are submitting. So just a reminder to submit your questions via the Q&A, and then we'll get to those questions in our last 30 minutes or so. So I'm going to stay on this slide for a second. And Chris, so looking at this slide, there's a lot going on, right? And that Vivien talked about that too. And looking at all these things that are possibly happening with our kids. So as a parent, if I see these things going on with my child, what should I do?
So that's a very interesting question. And it's one that not only do we need to talk about at the family level for parents, but also at the education level. So these emotions are real. I think everybody's felt them, but there still is a hesitancy or a stigma or a negative connotation about using the terms that are actually describing our states of emotion. And I think we've got to get over that. We have got to help kids feel comfortable about using these words, these descriptors, to indicate the emotional state that they're in. instead of trying to presume, if we can help our kids get more comfortable with using some of these unpleasant emotions that they are feeling and getting used to it, we're going to be much more effective in having an interaction with them to try to mitigate the intensity of that emotion that they're feeling at the time. I think we all ought to be aware that everybody experiences these emotions, but on the frequency and the duration that they are experiencing, it's an elevated level that many people are not used to. They're very uncomfortable with it. The kids are uncomfortable with it. And so one of the things that we've been working on in school is to get kids to talk about, to expand their vocabularies, to be able to identify the emotion and the level of intensity that they're feeling, so we can intervene and do the best we can to mitigate the intensity of it at that moment. And as for education, and just from a simple educational perspective, when youngsters are feeling these emotions intensely, they're not ready to learn. They're just not going to be able to attend and do the catch-up academics that we all want them to do. And we have to agree to deal with their emotional states first and create an environment where it's safe to express it, it's safe to feel it, and learn how to help these kids mitigate the intensity so that they can get on and do the things that they want to. And I'm sure Vivien and Glen have some more to say about this. It's a very important area.
Just this morning, I was consulting on about a young teenager who is beyond unmotivated. He basically has declared that he's not going to attend school until he can do so in person again. And the parents are feeling the frustration of what do they do. He's essentially completely unmotivated, whereas before he'd been a reasonably good student and doing well, but COVID hit him really hard. And he started class and then suddenly was unable to continue it and had expected to go back this fall and wasn't able to. So it's partly that unpredictability for him, but also the way he's expressing it is that he just has given up. And I wish I could say I had a magic solution for them, but the reality is that that's a temptation for many of us, and we need to find ways of motivating ourselves as parents to really help our children.
And I would say to piggyback on that, if you're seeing these things or you're noticing changes in your child's functioning, talk to someone. I mean, don't wait. Don't think that maybe it's just this week and maybe next week will be better, or that this is perhaps just a blip on the radar screen. The numbers are they're quite telling, right, in terms of the prevalence rates of all of these mental health kind of concerns that are coming up several months now into the pandemic. So whether that be reaching out to a place like CHC that offers free consults, or reaching out to someone you trust at your church, or reaching out to just a close friend, we're so insular in our bubble right now, in our little safe pods, that we no longer have perspectives, or we're lacking a lot of objectivity because we are living and feeling this every single moment of every single day. And that really does impair our judgments, right? Our blinders go up and we can't see things quite as clearly. And so talking to somebody outside the family, I think can be hopefully helpful in gaining perspective, but also just, again, a source of support for you, because you don't have all of the supports that you previously had, and we're all experiencing that greater sense of isolation.
And all of these things that we've just been talking about are as likely to affect you as an adult as they are children, and kids pick up on that. So if you think you're hiding that you're not sleeping well and that you're exhausted from multitasking and that you're irritable, you're not. The kids are going to pick up on it, and they're going to react to it.
This is a little bit like the airplane, the oxygen mask analogy, right? if you are passed out, you are of no use to your child. So finding ways to keep yourself kind of functional and regulated and everything like that, that is actually ultimately a service to your kids.
So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. So Glenn, another question. We realize that there's currently a lot out of our control right now, and that doesn't feel really good. So what things can parents control, and what might that look like?
Well, a routine schedule is enormously important. Actually, for a lot of kids, it's important anyway, but it's even more important when you've got a time of stress like that. When you can do things together that are unexpected times, bedtime rituals, morning rituals, actually getting up at the same time every morning and going to bed at a regular time are very important to sort of regularize things. One of the nice things that can happen potentially is that we as families can have meals together that we wouldn't have had in the past, and that can be a nice time to check in with one another, see how things are going, see what's coming up and may need to be dealt with. Regular exercise, if that's possible in your neighborhood, whether it's walking or if there's a trampoline in the backyard, if you've got that, something that the child can actually get some physical exercise is really very important. Even if they don't really want to do it, it's something well worth encouraging. And taking time for yourself, making sure that you get some alone time, some whatever works for you, meditation, yoga, listening to loud music, whatever it is, so that you've got a chance to sort of unwind yourself. And I think probably the most important thing is when you mess up, which happens, be open with one another. It's what Chris was talking about before. Share your emotions and sort of what's going on at a level the child can understand, so that the child feels more free to be able to do the same thing.
And I think to follow up with what Glenn was saying, just like the routines that you kind of set in place in your house, those are very kind of explicit and structured oftentimes, but there's also just a more nebulous sort of feel of your home environment. And we all know when the feel of our home environment is one that we don't prefer, right? You might not be having a lovely time with your significant other in the home, and there's a higher level of tension. Or you might have a lot of deadlines that you're falling behind at work because you're tending to your kids' Zoom school. So you're just feeling that, like, you can feel like your heart rate increasing and a certain level of anxiety increasing. I think that's a very common experience right now, this sort of like heightened anxiety and nervous energy. So the more that you can kind of regulate that feeling, and bring it to a calmer space, the better off, quite frankly, all of us are in the home. It is important to be realistic and forgiving, though, because the days can be very up and down. And I think all of us have our moments, hence why Glenn's point about apologizing and saying sorry has become more critical, I think, this year, because there are constant examples of times when one of my kids have come to me and they've interrupted a work meeting that I've had, and I have not been super patient and lovely with them. And I basically said to them at various points, I might say to them, why are you asking me? Why aren't you asking your dad? He's just having lunch right now. I'm on a meeting, right? I can give you lots of examples all night about ways that I've messed up. And I think that just having an awareness that those mess ups are just part of everyday life these days, and coming back around and apologizing and making things right, and just acknowledging your level of like, yeah, today has been a more stressful day for me. And so that's why you've noticed I have been more impatient, and I'm sorry. It's just, I really have been more stressed out with work, and tomorrow I'm going to do a better job of, not being as cranky, or whatever the verbiage, you want to use within your family. So paying really close attention to sort of the energy and the tone and the emotion that is being set in your household, I think is one really powerful way that you can kind of set the stage and control your immediate surroundings.
Flip side of that is to make sure to praise your children when things are going well, when they actually get started on time on school without having to be multiply reminded, and when they're doing their homework. We often, way too often as parents, focus on what they haven't done when in fact they've been doing a fair amount. And I think right now it's especially crucial to take those moments out and say, gosh, I really appreciate you're letting me, finish this meeting before we do something else.
We need to recognize acts and choices, the good choices that kids make today, and character traits that they're building. Our kids are building up resiliency. We are finding kids that we thought were rigid who are adapting to all the precautions amazingly well. And we cannot just assume that they should be doing that. We need to really identify it for them, because that feeling of I'm doing okay, I'm actually managing it. We saw that in our surveys, is that the kids could actually identify that they were developing character traits that they might not otherwise have had to. And that's a lifelong skill. So it's going to pay huge dividends to recognize the character traits and the choice and the good choices that our kids are making during this really hard time.
Yeah, thank you for that reminder too, that there's so much going on right now that we kind of see the negative, and it's nice to take a moment out to recognize our kids and what they're doing and how they're growing and changing. So another question, Vivien, as a parent, should I talk with my child about all this change and uncertainty that we've been dealing with? Or do I wait for my child to start the conversation with me? Or should I start what would that look like?
Great question. The answer depends a bit, but is generally yes. Please talk about these things with your child. I say that it depends because what that looks like is entirely dependent upon their developmental stage and their level of kind of, whether it be maturity around verbal expression or whatever their particular skills are. You want it to match their kind of developmental level, right? So the conversation you have with a kindergartner is very different than one you would have with a middle schooler. What is quite striking, though, about where we are all at together is that everybody is impacted, right? So even your little guys, barring perhaps the teeny tinies like the 0 to 2 year olds, even your little guys are largely like the 3, 4, 5-year-olds. They are commenting on things that are different, right? They're commenting on why can't they see grandma, or why can't they hug their friends if they're happen to be in school? Why can't they give them hugs? And why doesn't their preschool teacher hug them anymore, right? All the way up to our older kids and adolescents, who of course are much more vocal about missing things like sports and graduation and proms and everything like that. And so all of those comments that they make about things that they're missing or things that are different, I think those are all of your entry points as parents to continue the conversation. And to, I think, first and foremost, empathize with them, right? And let them know that you miss all of those things too. What they're experiencing and what they're feeling is completely normal, right? And being specific with them about, what are some of the things that I miss? I miss getting together with some of our closest family friends, right? Like, remember all of those barbecues that we did together with, this family, or these road trips that we used to take, or going to theme parks for fun. Like, I miss all of these things too. And so recognizing that's a real and valid and hard experience to go through. I think what's also important, though, to piggyback on, I think what Chris was really trying to get across, is that there is there is really a strengths piece here to not lose sight of, which is that there is a positive and a light at the end of the tunnel, right? There are strengths that your family has found in this time to kind of make it through and to survive. Or for some, quite frankly, there are students and kids who are thriving and doing better under these unique circumstances. So I think not only talking about the loss and processing that and validating that, but also making plans for the future that will look more like what life was like before COVID, for example. And so sitting down with your family and going through old videos and pictures of adventures that you guys took prior to COVID, I see where there could be some hesitancy about like, oh, do I really want to focus on all of the things that we're missing out on? That's not the angle I would take while spending time reviewing those videos and those photos. I would use it as a jumping off point to talk about the future. Like, what are the things as a family, like if you've got multiple kids, really talking to each one of them, like, what are you looking forward to the most? Like, what's the first thing or the first place you want to go to when we can take a road trip again, or when we can take an airplane again? Where would you go? And really, and asking and telling them what your hopes and wishes are too, right? Like, this is what I would choose to do. And, you know, if you have a spouse in the home, figuring out like, what is their hope and plan for the future? Because I think then it becomes a much more balanced picture, and it allows you to sort of see the light, if you will, at the end of this tunnel, right? That has felt extraordinarily long.
The piece that we haven't touched on, and this may come up in a separate question, while we need to talk about what's happening, what we don't need to do is to flood kids with lots and lots of information. So I first remember really experiencing this after the 9/11 destruction of the World Trade Center. There's a tendency as an adult to be curious about what's happening and to sort of ignore the fact that the TV is on or radio or whatever source of communication you may have. Any of those can be really overwhelming for kids. They're not going to be able to contextualize it. It tends to be very repetitious, particularly any of the 24-hour news stations. And the sense of being overwhelmed is just going to build up that much more. So think about how you're getting your information. If you feel the need to really keep up to date, I think that's great, but make sure that that's not being spilled over to kids who are not necessarily going to be able to understand it the way you would.
Actually, Glenn, that's a great point. And I can tell you that we are carving out specific periods of time at each school to talk about what's going on, in the world, and trying to help kids put some context on it, but also put some boundaries on it as well. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to suppress it totally and not deal with it at all, because the kids have emotions about not only COVID, but a lot of the other things that have gone on this year. And they need some modality and some time, an opportunity to be able to express their perceptions, their feelings, their thoughts, like, what do we think you ought to do? And at school, we've actually created small bits of time for kids to be able to do just that. And then we move on. So we're not denying it. We're not repressing it. We are opening it up, but we're also putting a boundary on it so it doesn't become overwhelming and it doesn't become all consuming and cause our kids to be in more emotional angst than when they started that conversation.
Thank you. All really good reminders for parents, I think, about what do you talk about? When do you talk about it? And not having the TV on all the time, as Glenn said, that's good for all of us. So Chris, as we think about this kind of on the same topic, and Glenn alluded to this, but how much exposure should kids have to the ongoing societal stressors that we are experiencing?
Well, I think it actually dovetails right into what I just talked about, is We need to provide opportunity in a structured sort of setting, if you will, where people are allowed to express their perceptions. We may need to provide more some factual information so that the miscommunications that happen, the misinformation they may get, the misinterpretations, that we can help correct those as adults, as educators, as parents, and then allow some feedback from the kids. What, how are you feeling about that? What do you think about, what would you do if you're an adult about that situation? And then saying, okay, that was a great conversation. Let's move on from that, and then not jump on the TV, but find something enjoyable. Find something that we know is calming for the family or for that particular individual, whether it's they go and listen to music, as Glen has talked about, you take a bicycle ride, something like that. But the opportunity, and to know that there's going to be some time to talk about the politics of today, or the terrible wildfires and all the people who are evacuated and where are they today, all of those things we cannot just dismiss and pretend they didn't happen. But we also need to put really clear boundaries around how deep, how often, and what kinds of conversation, structuring that conversation for them.
And I think also funneling that information through a personal connection is crucial, right? So the media, no matter, it is just sort of unrelenting, right? It's this barrage of, whether you're talking about media on your smartphones or media on the television, that level of exposure, I would say definitely please limit, because repeated exposure to media that you cannot control can absolutely be traumatizing to young people, and quite frankly to older people. And especially for our young people who don't have the same sense of, they can't anchor information in space and time in the same way that we can, right? So one of the things that happened around the time of, this is some of the protests that happened around the Black Lives Matters movements. And there were certain places that had more kind of violent protests, right? And there was a ton of news coverage on this. I didn't have this on in my home, but one of the things that happened was we were FaceTiming a family member. So what did they have to go? So, and mind you, I already do you're on FaceTime, like, hey, look, my kids are here, say hello. So I already do that. And what was the first thing? How did you see they burned down that plaza with the Chase Bank? And I was like, fantastic, thank you, end. So I actually ended that FaceTime phone call, but that's just kind of one concrete example of how kind of our new digital worlds can intrude on the boundaries that we've otherwise set, right? Like I'm not choosing to watch kind of plazas burning down in my own household, but because we're not actually interacting much with folks outside of our immediate family, we are FaceTiming more though, right? So there's FaceTime intrusion into my family, and those elements are harder to control. So just keep staying mindful of like what those factors might be in your life and where your kids might be getting exposure to media or news or information in ways that you perhaps would rather not occur.
Okay, last question, last of our pre-planned questions, and then we'll jump over to the questions that people have been posing in the Q&A. So a question for all of you, but let's start with Glen. What is an important takeaway that you hope parents walk away with as a result of participating this evening?
I know people are looking for one-size-fits-all answers, and I wish we had them. I think the takeaway message that I would really encourage parents to do is to pat yourself on the back as well as your kids. Be aware when you're doing something right. And as we talked earlier, when you mess up, which you will, being open to apologizing for that. I think the other is if you've got a partner, really try to make sure that that partnership works smoothly and take time to check in with one another. Because the kids are going to find any little niche and hole that is there to disrupt you. So be aware that this isn't going to last forever, which many kids do feel like it is, but we don't know how long it's going to last, and we've got to keep up the good work.
And I would say very much related to the idea of kind of patting yourself on the back and showing yourself a lot of grace is also kind of making that a priority when you think about your connection with your kids. So the connection, which is it's easy to lose sight of this, I should say. The connections that you have with your kids is much more important than the assignments that you're managing with them, right? So it is absolutely going to happen that there will be lots of opportunities for power struggles around school assignments, right? Or the quality of a particular assignment that they did. Especially in these times, I would say choose the connection over the assignment or the task. Whatever it is, the connection is ultimately what you will always take forward with you. If they bomb that assignment or that report or things like that, that is much more manageable and fixable, if you will, than a damaged connection. And so showing your child, I think a lot of grace can help in that. And so, yes, from your perspective as a parent, they may have done something with very limited effort with the sole purpose of perhaps just saying that they turned it in, right? And the quality is poor. Show them grace and remember how hard this is for them as well and how long they've been doing this as well. So allowing them those moments to just, not do as well as perhaps you previously, your expectations and your bar was previously set for them because you want to protect your connection with them.
I couldn't agree, Vivien, more. The connection is most important. I guess the only thing I would add to that is find positivity each day. Look for opportunities to praise, look for opportunities to really acknowledge when kids are making good choices or character traits that they're developing despite all the hardship they're going through. And I think it's very important, without being unrealistic, that we convey hope for the future, that our future is this is not forever, and we need to make sure that our kids understand that. And yes, this is hard. It's been longer than anybody thought, but it will subside, it will abate, and we will get more normalcy in the not too distant future. And so, but stressing positivity right now, I think, is, to me, one of the most important things we can do. And not only parent to child, but parent to parent, and teacher to the families that are stressed. I mean, we just need to identify specific things that kids are showing us that tell us you're doing as well or better than we could ever have expected.
I think you sort of alluded to that, Chris, and I wanted to reemphasize it. I think giving teachers some leeway as well is really important. I mean, we have this expectation that somehow teachers in that role are just going to be teachers. They're probably parents as well, and they've got their own tensions, and they're having to master technologies that they never thought they were ever going to have to master. So, giving teachers a bit of slack as well, and recognizing they may have a bad day occasionally, I think is as important as everything else we've talked about.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the reminders about, show yourself a little grace, show others a little grace, and especially right now. So let's go to some of our questions that have been posed by our attendees. So here's one. So a 15-year-old daughter who seems to be obsessed with sanitizing stuff in her room. She often wipes down her desk, almost all the other stuff, and no one else goes into her room but thinks there's a lot of germs there. So her behaviors become somewhat obsessive to the point she doesn't want to wear certain clothes or touch certain, wasn't anybody touching certain things of hers. So the question here is, given this behavior, should the parent be concerned, or is this a function of the pandemic and it will go away? Or even if it is a function of the pandemic, should I still be concerned?
So stress tends to bring out whatever relative areas of weakness we've got. And it certainly sounds like she's feeling very overwhelmed. And I suspect she's spending a large amount of time both obsessing about this as well as engaged in those behaviors. Whether it's reached the level that it needs professional intervention is hard to answer in this kind of a forum. But this would be an excellent situation in which, for example, to use that 30-minute consult that CHC offers, because talking to a professional about what's going on and whether or not it's time to try to help her, and even talking with the daughter about how much time is she spending, is she likely she's actually thinking about it even more than she's doing. So just what I've heard, I would certainly worry that this is something that could become quite debilitating for her and would be worth seriously thinking about at least getting some professional advice.
Thank you, Glenn. Chris, here's a question that has a little bit more to do with education. So what can parents do to set up a successful physical learning environment in the home?
Wow. Please don't tell me there are 15 kids in the house, because it's not probably gonna happen. So again, I think setting up stations where kids can feel like they have their desk, their laptop, their school supplies, probably not in multiple locations, but there's a designated area in the home that is theirs. It can be their office, however you want to call it. I'm not a big fan of having everybody go to the kitchen table. I do think kids need some space and some room to be able to work. Now, that doesn't mean that they're always going to be attending, and that's yet another issue. I would also say that it's very important to try to work with the educators who are working with the youngster to set up as regular schedule with breaks, with time breaks, with regular time breaks. So parents can know English is from 9 o'clock to 9:50, and then there's going to be a 15-minute break. And for the parent, more so than actually helping the youngster during the lesson, is making sure the kids get off and do something else, take a break from screen time during that 15 minutes. And to keep with, as much as Glenn was saying earlier on in the presentation, to create routines so kids get used to doing things at certain times. The more we change and the less predictable and consistent we make their lives, the worse they're going to do. So as much as we can, you set up designated spaces and then set up schedules as consistent and predictable as you can possibly create. And certainly there are going to be complicating factors around that as well. But those are the two basic things I'd start with.
Okay, great. Thank you. And let's change it up. So one parent is asking for some tools. Can we have some tools on how to work with youth to connect with the level of intensity of emotions? So I didn't point that to any one of you. I don't know if Vivien, how about you?
Sure. So I would say Yeah, emotional regulation has become particularly tricky, but oh so relevant for every single family member in our new lives, much more so than before. So I'm going to assume that, some folks have like psychologically minded kiddos or teens. Congratulations to you, because you might be able to have pretty direct conversations about sort of like where they're at and how upset they are or how intensely anxious they are or things like that. But assuming that that's not the case, because I think that includes the masses, right? Most of us do not have kids who are that psychologically minded. I think talking to them about kind of different coping strategies or different things that seem to help them feel better, whether that be, and for the younger kids, I really think you need to identify what those things are, right? You can reflect to them like, oh, you've noticed that when they are dribbling the basketball, or when they're running up and down the stairs, or after they've had that level of kind of movement break or things like that, that seems to help. Or after they've had a really hearty snack, right? So they seem to be in a better mood. So identifying for them what those coping strategies are when they are dysregulated, I think is one piece of it. The other thing that I think is important to do in these times is to model to them and give them examples of, like, for example, for you as mom, right? Talking to them about, how mom has days when I'm like just maybe a little bit cranky. And then there are other days where you can tell that I'm super stressed out. And, that because maybe I am not playing with you as much, or I'm using my louder tone of voice or things like that. Talking to them about like how you regulate your own emotions, I think can be hugely important in these times, because you're recognizing, you're making, it's that parallel process, right? You're teaching them that everyone has these moments. They're not atypical. There's not something wrong with them because they're having these volatile moments or these kind of meltdowns or things like that, because we've all had them. And it's so helpful for kids to see that, oh my gosh, mom and dad or whomever the primary caregiver is, who they respect and look up to, he or she or they have these moments as well, right? So you're kind of taking the sting out of, having meltdowns and having a really bad moment. I think the other importance of using you as a model in these times is the fact that our kids get tons of social emotional learning in our normal lives from a number of different sources, right? They're getting that input from their school, the educators, their peers, their cousins, their sports teams and everything like that. And for better or for worse, what's happened is we largely don't have nearly as many models, right, in our lives to help kind of, help our kids learn and help them regulate. And so what that means is, whether we want it or not, we are a more salient model and the primary model right now. So really kind of embracing the messiness of that process and talking through these things with your kids and using you as an example, I think can be really powerful.
I think a key part of that is what Vivien was talking about, is having a conversation, because you really want to try to elicit from the child what his or her perception of things are and not make assumptions. There's a wonderful book, which is actually in the reading list that you'll be seeing, that I fell madly in love with when it came out, called Raising Human Beings. And what it does is to really emphasize that the way we best parent is not to impose top down, but to allow the child to feel like a participant in what's going on. So if there's a behavior that the kid is engaged in that's driving you crazy, you can bring that up and sort of say, well, I noticed that you've been doing this a lot. Can you talk to me about that and tell me what makes you do that? And listen and sort of repeat back to them what's going on, and then talk about how it makes you feel, and then begin to work together. Can we come up with a solution where you can get your needs met, but mine are met too?
So there's there's a prerequisite to what Vivien and Glen were talking about, and that is that we actually, as adults, need to be self-aware of our emotional states and to be conscious about how it is that we're coping. If we're not actually consciously thinking about that, we may do actually some very counterproductive modeling. So I think it's worth us as adults, whether we're educators, whether we're mental health professionals, whether we're parents, whether we're financially struggling or whether we're coping, we think we're coping pretty well, to consciously think about how is it that I'm looking when I'm irritated, or how am I coping with irritability? How am I showing that I'm managing my irritability and not taking it out on somebody else? And that's, I mean, that's a lot of instruction that we're working with kids. And I'm basically saying, parents, give yourself a crash course on that, because these emotions are going to be exacerbated and more intense during this period of time. And so the lessons on managing it become that much more important.
Thank you. And actually, there was another question that was similar. A a parent said, I think my child is picking up on my stress. So how can I keep that from happening? Is there anything else that you all would want to add based on that question, or do you feel like it pretty much covered it? You good?
I think we pretty well covered it. I would say acknowledging it is really what we're talking about. I mean, that's kind of what Chris was talking about as well. We have to recognize it in ourselves, and then state, right now I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. I need some time by myself, and hope that your screen doesn't freeze just when you're talking. But that ability to sort of have I mean, there still is what adults need to know and what kids need to know, and we don't need to share everything, but that ability to acknowledge that, no, they're not imagining this. I really am different than I normally would be as a parent, I think is very reassuring for the kid. It reaffirms their sense of reality.
So Glenn just gave a great example of acknowledging it and then doing something about it. When you say to a youngster, I'm really feeling stressed right now, and I think I need to take a few moments of quiet time, you've acknowledged the emotion and you've actually modeled how to manage that, how to abate the intensity of that. And see how simple that is? It's like a 5-second thing, but it reaps huge benefits, believe me.
Great. Thank you for those additional insights. So going back to learning for a minute, so their parents have voiced that they have kids that are not motivated to engage in distance learning. And so do you have any thoughts or advice about how parents can best support those kids? Anyone want to start? Chris, you're going for it?
As the educator, I have. So I mean, it's pretty well documented that the majority of kids are not doing as well on distance learning. They're just not. That the personalized interactions are not as personalized. Let's face it. I mean, even though we're talking to you as an audience, I'm sure you feel some distance, and we're looking at Vivien and myself and Glen when we're not talking and we're staring into the screen. So there are definitely downsides. What I know that the area schools are trying to do as much as they can is to at least start opening up the campuses, because they recognize how important it is for these kids to have live interaction, A, with their peers, and B, with their teachers. And so I know that right now with COVID surging where you folks are, I'm on Cape Cod, incidentally, where it's not. But where it's surging is that uncertainty is a real cloud over the future. But I'm pretty optimistic that over the next semester, the schools are going to open up. I know one of the trepidations is the teachers' health and the educators' health, and their concern about being exposed and being in an environment where that infection is going to happen. I can tell you that our experience at CHC was that by following and exceeding all the mandated orders and the health and safety protocols by the Department of Public Health, by making sure we were not putting too many kids on the campus at any one time, we mitigated the dependency on distance learning and found that kids could tolerate that if they also had the option of going to school. So it's not like we have to go from full distance learning to full school. We have seen kids adapt and be able to engage better in distance learning if they have some opportunity to have live interaction on campus with their peers and teachers. That doesn't help for tomorrow. I'm sorry, there's no answer for tomorrow.
Somewhat related, one of the common questions that we get asked in the clinic are for our kids who learn differently. How in the world do we get accommodations, and what accommodations are applicable and available to them in distance learning? We do also have this resource in the CHC resource library, but I also wanted to put it in the chat box. It's from understood.org, which is a really fantastic online research. Their search engine is one of my favorites because it's just easy and intuitive. And so if you were to search distance learning, for example, a lot of supports and just guides and resources will come up. This is one of my favorites because of how frequently we get this question from families. You know, my kid's got a 504 plan and they're supposed to get X, Y, and Z with their 504 plan. They're not getting anything in distance learning, or they don't seem to be getting anything, or I have a teacher who's telling me that we can't do any accommodations because of distance learning. And this resource here is really fantastic because it's essentially a kind of a crosswalk of, you know, what was the support your child was getting prior to, you know, in regular school, in person, and what might that look like now in distance learning land.
Thank you. I know it's tricky to for parents to be able to navigate all of distance learning, and you know how to motivate your child when they're not motivated. That's age-old question. But so we are looking kind of at our last 8-ish minutes. And I know that we have a couple more slides to share because we want to share some resources. So that we'll put those up in just a minute. But just before as we wrap up the questions, do you all have any parting thoughts or additional words of wisdom that you want to share with parents as we wrap it up tonight?
I'll start. So I think Vivien really adeptly, I think, described the lack of control that many of us are feeling, many families are feeling. I know educators are feeling, you know, like everything is out of control as well. I think one of the ways that we can mitigate that is actually to begin to present some choices about what we can do. And allowing, and Glen was very articulate in this when he talked about we need to listen to our kids. And so when our kids are feeling hopeless or helpless, or I'm paralyzed, there's nothing I can do right now, we need to help them identify choices that they could make. We only give up choices when we decide to make the choice to give up making choices. And so what we want to help our kids do is help them recognize that they do have choices and where those choices might lead to making them feel better. For example, I feel lousy right now. Well, what could you do? Let's talk about I've noticed that when you go out and dribble the basketball, you actually come in and feel better. That's a choice you could make right now and mitigate the helpless or hopeless feelings that you're having right now. Or would it be better if you took a bike ride? I'll go on a bike ride with you. But we need to offer productive, active choices that kids can take when they're feeling overwhelmed by their emotions and they don't know what to do with them. We need to provide them with opportunities and and scripted choices that we have observed them benefiting from. So that's one of the ways I'd like to leave the audience with, that is make sure your kids know that they always can make a choice. Sometimes the choices work out, sometimes they don't, but they have the power to make choices.
Especially for younger kids, the thing I would add to that is keep the choices relatively limited, one or two, this or this, and make sure that you're happy with either one. You don't want to offer something that you actually can't come through with. Like, I'm going to spend the next hour with you, and you're not going to really able to do that. I think keeping promises is one of those pieces that we didn't touch on that's really crucial in a sense of reliability, that I can depend on mom and dad when they say something, when they promise something, that's going to happen. So don't promise things you can't fulfill, but also when you've made a promise, do your very best to carry it through.
And then I think my tidbit is essentially try and find little things and little joy-filled activities where you can, because the Zoom fatigue and the remote learning fatigue is very, very significant. And so whatever that is for your particular family within the confines of like your space and your kind of financial means and the resources that you have in your house, whether it be access to toys or things like that. I think this is why you see the holiday decorations right this year up in like November 1st. I think people are intentionally trying to add a little joy and a little extra joy, right, into our families' lives and our kids' lives. So, whether that be taking out toys from the garage that you had planned on donating because you thought you didn't need them anymore, but bringing them out for a sense of novelty, or, eating pancakes for dinner just to change things up and just to sort of make your kids laugh in the moment. I think those little gestures and little moments can be quite powerful in these times.
Thank you. Thank you all. I know one of the things that came up with our family over Thanksgiving, conversations about people saying, well, they said, well, we're not going to do a tree this year because it's going to be so low key, or, we're not going to do all the lights this year. And then, and actually, as we started talking about it more, people said, so talking about little joys, like, we're going to do it up bigger actually this year. So that, it's kind of fun, and it's fun to see that every day. And so, just thinking about, everyone has different perspectives on that, right? But just thinking about the choices that we're making, and how we can, as Vivien just said, like, find those moments to create joy. So thank you all. You can see the resources that we've listed up here on the slide that's showing currently. Again, we will have the slides and the recording available in our online resource library next week, so you can access them there. You don't have to write down everything you see here, but you can see in our resource library, we have variety of articles and presentations and videos, and some of the articles listed there are from our resource library that particularly relate to our topic this evening. So, and the book that Glen mentioned, Raising Human Beings, is listed on the resources as well. So thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening and investing that time with us. We know that your days are chock full, so we appreciate you participating this evening. As I mentioned previously, you will be receiving an email from us with a survey. Please take a minute to fill out the survey. It's pretty brief, and that information is important to us. And also, if you feel so led, we appreciate any donations that you might give to help us keep these kinds of sessions free of charge. So thank you so much for attending. And if you have any questions, you can feel free to email communityed@chconline.org. And hopefully we'll get to see you one day again in the future in real time. So thank you so much.